Over 4 million Australians have a disability. That is about 1 in 5 people, which means 2.1 million Australians have a disability. So picture this: 1 in 3 people have a disability or is likely to be close to someone with a disability. Disability can be a multi-dimensional experience for the individual involved, meaning a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. This can be any continuing condition that restricts everyday activities. This describes how the damage of mental function, disease, illness, disorder in their thought process, or behaviour can be referred to as disability. This affects a person's vision, hearing, thinking, learning, movement, mental health, remembering, communicating, and social relationships. The Disability Service Act defines disability as a permanent or likely to be permanently reduced capabilities of the person in communication, social interaction, or learning. The main categories of disability are physical, sensory, psychiatric, neurological, cognitive, and intellectual. Physical disability relates to disorders of the musculoskeletal, respiratory, and nervous system. The way we speak about someone with a disability can have a profound effect on the individual and community attitudes. This may degrade and diminish people with disability, as it portrays inaccurate stereotypes. Stella Young breaks down society's habit of turning those with disability into those of inspiration. This is an example of society victimizing and threatening them unfairly because they have a disability.
Because they objectify one group of people for the benefit of another group of people. So in this case, we're objectifying disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. The purpose of these images is to inspire you, to motivate you, so that we can look at them and think, well, however bad my life is, it could be worse. I could be that person. But what if you are that person?
Stella explains that through appropriate interactions, the society can help break down the barriers in the physical environment. This is significant because we recognise people with disability for what they can do rather than their limitations due to the socio-political context in which we live. This relates back to the Australian curriculum of what schools teach. These legislative acts support teachers in meeting their obligations under the disability standards for education, ensuring that all students with disability can participate in the Australian curriculum on the same basis as their peers through meaningful learning programs. It builds on the general student diversity that applies to all educational settings and context, including specialist schools and support classes. In Barbara Davis's Tools for Teaching, she explains that it is important for instructors to become aware of any stereotypes students may have absorbed. Your attitudes and values not only influence the attitudes and values of your students, but they can affect the way you teach, especially your assumptions about students, which can lead to unequal learning outcomes for those in your classes. This combats any issues of teachers inadequately recognising students as equal to promote diversity. Disability limits students' abilities in education as it can slow the process of reading and writing, which challenges memory and causes difficulties contributing to classroom or group discussions. Someone with attention disorder may also find it difficult to maintain focus, as paying attention is critical to learning. The importance of adequate education, not only for the implementation of special schools, but the education of disability within the society taught in mainstream schools will help reduce social barriers. Also, providing specialist equipment in mainstream schools will support the participation of students, and further funding in this area will result in text-to-speech software, speech-generating devices, and devices for physical activities. Simple changes to the usual way of doing things that enable a student with disability to participate in will balance for all students involved. Schools supplying specialist services regarding speech pathology, psychology, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and social work can act as supporting staff as well. Solutions for this educational barrier is inclusive education, where every student, with or without a disability, is welcome and able to participate fully in all aspects of education. This relates to the strength-based approach, which is an approach to people that view situations realistically and look for opportunities to support students with disability strengths. An example of this is the universal design, which benefits all learners through inclusive practice that involves a change in mindset about how society, schools, and students work together to allow for all students to achieve meaningful individual and group learning outcomes. Inclusion is a response to global concerns for all children and young people to have the right to access and complete a free and compulsory education that supports their needs and is relevant to their lives. Another possible solution is special education support programs that supply educational needs for students with a disability, allowing them to participate and achieve at school. These programs focus on autism spectrum disorder, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, physical impairment, speech language impairment, and vision impairment. Special education support programs support the education team in curriculum planning for the student and monitoring the process, performance, and the behaviour of students. The strength-based approach consists of questioning strategies to identify what works for the child and how it works, so that these strategies can match the child's abilities. Education literature states, "It is by the quality of interactions and relationships that all students learn to understand and appreciate the difference, to value diversity, and to learn to respond with dignity and respect through all mutually enriching interactions." The curriculum provides equal access for all and positive interactions with students from different backgrounds with diverse needs and abilities. Not all disabilities are visible. An example is Alice, who has never seen a specialist but has had breathing difficulties from birth. According to the Disability Discrimination Act, Alice has disability, as the staff members believe she has a disorder that may result in her learning differently. We as teachers need to include all students in educational programs, as the disability standards for education apply to all students with disability. This issue relates to the social model, as it's a result of the societal norms and the physical environment. Moreover, this can be a conflict of interest between inequalities of education and the wider society. As these social inequalities persist, it attempts to disrupt the social structures impacting on functionalism. Another view that is often overlooked is the interactional view, which is a communication theory that covers the miscommunications that arise from varying situations. The interaction theory focuses on the social justice between classrooms to empower for a positive change to move towards a more adaptable centre of learning.
I use the term disabled people quite deliberately because I subscribe to what's called the social model of disability, which tells us that we are more disabled by our bodies, the society that we live in rather, than by our bodies and our diagnoses. So I've lived in this body a long time. I'm quite fond of it. It does the things that I need it to do, and I've learnt to use it to the best of its capacity, just as you have.
Volunteering at Banksia Gardens includes tutoring disadvantaged children that require additional numeracy and literacy education through study groups or one-on-one tutoring. Some students display signs of intellectual and developmental disability, which relate to difficulties through processing, learning, and communication. Volunteering here gave me the opportunity to communicate with primary students in need to determine an adequate work plan which would subsequently meet their academic goals and needs. Consider this. Identify the needs of people with disabilities and highlight what is needed regarding education and future employment. Then turn to the person next to you and discuss your thoughts. Disability is a normal part of human diversity. It may be permanent, temporary, or unstable for the individual. Ultimately, it impacts mobility and learning, and it is up to us, as pre-service inclusive educators, to provide an adequate classroom to cater for all students' needs.